Hello, everyone, and welcome to our PSAT Scores Are Back Now What event. My name is Beth Hoffberg, and I am one of the Kaplan teachers. I've actually been with Kaplan for about 11 years, helping students get into college and improve their PSAT and SAT and ACT scores, and even beyond that, helping students with getting into med school, law school, business school. So I've got a lot of test expertise, and I'm really excited to help you understand what the PSAT means. But I'm not the only one here to help you. We've got a whole team of amazing Kaplan and PSAT and ACT and SAT experts, and you are going to see them in the chat. We'd love to talk with you in the chat. We've got Arthur, Steve, Sharon, Missy, and David all here with you tonight as well, and we are all really excited to help you figure out what you can do to help your student be set up for success so that they can be really competitive when it comes to college admissions. So that's a little bit about us. Thanks for voting in the poll so that we could get to know you as well. It looks like we're kind of split between parents of sophomores and parents of juniors. Welcome to all of you. We will make sure that no matter what year your student is, you have a plan for what to do going forward. So we are going to focus tonight on Kaplan's method for taking yourself or your student from the PSAT to college admissions. There's really 5 steps, and we're going to focus on the first 3 tonight. So we'll talk about how the PSAT score report works so you can really understand it, because then you'll be able to take that understanding and turn it into a plan so that you know what your student should do in terms of a future PSAT, and then really more importantly, whether the ACT or the SAT is going to be best for you or for your student. And then once you know which test is going to be best, you want to have a test prep plan so that you can get the highest score possible and really make yourself competitive in admissions. I'm curious from you all if you know what are the top factors that colleges care about when they're looking at students' applications for college admissions. You guys tell me about that. In the meantime, I'll tell you about steps 4 and 5, which is to take the official ACT and SAT. So we won't do that tonight. Don't worry. I'm not going to make you take an official test tonight. And then, of course, apply to colleges and then hopefully get into college and the colleges of your choice later. So that's the 5-step plan. And the two top factors for college admissions are GPA or grades and your ACT or SAT scores. So that's why it's so important to have those great scores in admissions. So let's take a look at how this journey plays out over time. And don't worry if your student is already a junior and didn't do certain things in 10th grade, or if your student is already a senior and didn't do these things previously. That's okay. Like, no matter where you're starting, like, now you know what to do and you're going to know what to do going forward. But for those of you who are parents of sophomores, the first thing that your student should have done is take the PSAT, which they probably did earlier in October. And then they want to start exploring the ACT and the SAT. And then in 11th grade, also, the students should take the PSAT, but hopefully this time they study more for the PSAT, because the 11th grade PSAT is the one that counts. And then you really want to focus in 11th grade on choosing which test, the ACT or the SAT, that your student's going to take. Then prep for it, take it, and do a great job. And that way, in 12th grade or senior year, your student can really focus on applying to colleges. They can still take the ACT or SAT again if needed, but really they want to focus on the rest of their application, their letters of recommendation, their personal statement, rounding out their extracurriculars, and all of those things so they can get into college. So that's the journey. But again, we're going to start way back with just understanding the PSAT. So in order to understand the score report, it actually will help us if we zoom out even just a little bit further, which is to understanding why the PSAT even exists. So the PSAT is a preliminary SAT, but we also think of it as like a practice SAT. It's not exactly the same as the SAT, and we'll talk a little bit about how that is different in a bit, but it is a good gauge of how your student would perform on the SAT, and even to some extent on the ACT. Now, another reason that the PSAT is used is for National Merit Scholarship qualifying or qualification. So I would love to know in the chat if anyone is hoping that their student is going to qualify for a National Merit Scholarship. I don't know if you know this, but this is one of the most prestigious scholarships that we have in the US for students applying to college, and it essentially pays for college, which, like, well, who wouldn't want to have their child's college education completely paid for. But one thing that's really important to know is that only juniors qualify for national merit. So even if as a sophomore your student scored the perfect score on the PSAT, which is a 1520, it doesn't matter. They aren't considered for national merit until they are juniors. That's the only time that it matters. Now, one thing that the PSAT is not for is college admissions. Like we mentioned before, the top two factors for college admissions are GPA and test scores, but they're the test scores for your ACT and SAT, not for PSAT. So the only way that colleges really care about the PSAT is if you are a national merit semifinalist or finalist, because that is prestigious, but they don't really use it beyond that to determine if you should get into their college, and you actually don't even send your PSAT scores as part of your application. So don't worry about that. It's really just for practice, and so it's going to help you to figure out where you're doing or how you're doing now and where you need to improve so that you can get into the colleges that you want. Okay, so that's really what the PSAT is for. Let's check in real briefly on the PSAT timeline. So probably if you're here, you've received your PSAT scores or your student scores already. There were 3 test dates this year in 2017. There's always 3 test dates in October. That's the only time of year actually that the PSAT is offered. This year was on the 11th, 14th, and 25th of October. It kind of varies from year to year. But the next time the PSAT will be offered won't be until October 2018. So again, for our sophomore parents, your students have 10 months to prepare for the next PSAT. That's a lot of time. We normally recommend about 3 months to prepare. And even if they're really striving for national merit, we'll have test prep options for them and really give you some great ideas of things that you can do so that your student can really become competitive. On December 4th, so 10 days ago, the PSAT scores were then made accessible to school counselors, high school counselors. So you might have found out your scores a while ago because depending on your school, the counselors sometimes provide them to you. But over the past 3 days, it depends on where you live, the College Board started releasing scores through their electronic portal. So the 11th through the 13th. Definitely let us know in the chat how your student did, and then we can help figure out what to do next for you. So hopefully you've seen your students' scores, and then we're going to talk about those score meanings now. So the first thing to know is that the PSAT is scored from 320 to 1520. The highest score is a 1520, and you get a 320 for filling in your name. So there's basically 1,200 points up for grabs, and 600 of those points come from reading and writing, and 600 of those points come from math. The middle score, that median score, that 50th percentile score, is a 920. So one way that you can assess how your student is doing is whether they were above or below that 920. Wow, Brenda Whalen, that is amazing. Your twins are scoring so high. We'll talk about that in a bit. Awesome. So the score for the composite score, that 320 to 1520, comes from adding together your evidence-based reading and writing score and your math score. They're weighted equally, so 50% towards the reading and writing and 50% towards the math. So I just mentioned to Brenda that her students, her twins, did great, but let's talk about like what is really a good PSAT score. So there's a lot of different ways to evaluate whether a score is good. One of the ways is the College Board provides, which is the test maker, provides a college and career readiness benchmark. They provide this for the PSAT, they provide it for the SAT, and then the ACT has one for the ACT, and colleges use this for the SAT and the ACT. They look at these career and college readiness benchmarks to determine if your student is going to be successful at their school. And that's because these benchmarks give a 75% likelihood of achieving a C or better in first-year college courses. So schools don't really want to admit kids that are not going to get at least a C in their freshman year classes because that means that they're probably not going to be successful throughout the rest of their college program. So that's why these benchmarks are there. Thanks so much for sharing your scores, Brenda and Kavitha and Sucharita. We love seeing this, and I'll talk about how these all kind of play in. Okay, so for 10th grade versus 11th grade, there are different benchmarks because we would assume that a 10th grader improves to 11th grade, and then you'd improve again in 12th grade. There's no PSAT then, but then ideally, like you keep improving on through until college. So these are the benchmarks, and if your student's scoring below these benchmarks in these sections, that's going to be a really good indication that your student has some work to do. So one of the benefits of actually preparing for the PSAT is not just to improve your PSAT score, but it's actually to become more ready for college and a future career, because we really want to get students to be thinking like a college student. So that's one of the other benefits. Okay, so that's one way to think about a good score. Like, did you beat the readiness benchmark? That's one of the things that you can strive for. Another way to think about it is through percentiles. So a percentile tells you the percent of students that you did better than. So for example, a 90th percentile would mean that you scored better than 90% of test takers. Fun fact, every Kaplan teacher has to have scored at least in the 90th percentile or above to even be allowed to teach for Kaplan. Most of us have scored higher than that, especially our teachers that do these online programs. A lot of us have scored in the 99th percentile or above, so you know when you're talking to a Kaplan teacher, you're talking to someone who is a true expert. And it looks like, so let's see, I see Kavitha is saying that her daughter got an 1100 on the PSAT 8-9, an 1100. So if that was, let's say, on the PSAT 10 for 10th graders, that's around the 80th percentile. That's a really, really great score. And I see Brenda was saying about 1400 and 1450 for, I'm not sure what year they are, but let's say that they're, if they were juniors, that would have been like a 99th percentile score, right? It would definitely be high in the 99ths for the 10th graders. Jalen, thanks for sharing your score, 1380. So you can see though that it depends on if you're a 10th grader or an 11th grader. Now here's another thing that you guys can kind of think about. So how many more points, you can tell me in the chat, just use this chart. How many more points did you need to get right, or did your student need to get right, to go from the 70th to the 80th percentile? Use the chart for me to go from 70th to 80th percentile. How many more points did you need to get? And it actually didn't matter either 10th grade or 11th grade. So like 1030 to 1090 or 1120 to 1180 is actually just 60 points. Well, 60 points translates to about a question and a half more right per section, because it's about 6 more questions right, and that averages out, because there's 4 sections of the test that are multiple choice, that averages out to 1.5 questions right per section. So you could say like 2 questions more correct in 2 sections, 1 question more correct in 1 section. But when you improve by 10 percentage points, you're improving by almost 2 million by almost 200,000 students, because there's about 2 million test takers. So 10 percentage points improves you over, jumps you over about 200,000 people. That's a huge improvement, a huge competitive advantage. So that's why figuring out how to get those additional 6 questions right, or 7 questions right, or even 12 or 13 questions right is going to make a huge difference in how competitive you are. Okay, now another way to think about it is national merit. And I see like Brenda was talking about national merit, and awesome. I love, we've got parents of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, all here. So national merit is that really prestigious scholarship that I was talking about. And we have the cutoffs from 2016. The cutoffs for 2017 will not have yet been determined, because they're determined state by state. So what you can do is you could Google what the 2016 cutoffs were for your state, but the ranges for 2016 were from 1380 to 1480. And if we just flip back for a second to the previous chart, you can see a 1380 to a 1480. Remember, it's only for juniors. We're talking above the 95th percentile, and sometimes above the 99th percentile, like you're in the 99th. There's no above the 99th. You're in that really, really high range of scores in order to get national merit. We're in this range over here. So what I want you to do though, like, cause that 1380, if you think about it compared to like 1520, that's a lot of points off from 1520. So a lot of times I'll see students who get really upset about their scores, because they're like, oh, like I only got a 1280, and that sounds so far away from 1520. And in a high school class, like you're thinking all just about points. But on the PSAT or on the ACT or on the SAT, all that matters is percentile. And so for parents out there, or if you're a student, what I really want you to think about is what percentile score did your student get, because that's really all that matters. It's not how far off from 1520 they are, it's the percentile score that they got. Kavita, there's no such thing as a 100th percentile. That just is not, that's just not how percentiles work. Because remember, percentile is the percent of students that you do better than, or test takers that you do better than. And there's no way to do better than 100% of test takers, because that would mean you do better than yourself too. So 100 percentile is not a viable score. 99th is the highest possible percentile. Hopefully that makes sense. That's true on any test ever. That's just how percentiles work. That's even true like if babies get measured on like height and weight percentiles, it's the same. There's no such thing as 100th percentile. That's a really good question. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense about percentiles, and again with national merit. And just one more reminder, only juniors are considered for national merit. So again, even if your freshman or sophomore scored a perfect score as a freshman or sophomore, it does not count for national merit until junior year. So they're going to need to take the PSAT again to qualify for national merit as a junior. Okay, so now we've had a bunch of different ways that we can think about how the PSAT scores work and whether a score is a good score. Here's one more thing I want you to think about though. Any score on the PSAT is a good score, because the PSAT, we said, is just for practice. And really the point of taking the PSAT, aside from national merit, is to start to prepare for the SAT and the ACT, which matters. So just by taking the PSAT, your student is already doing the right thing by working towards getting into college. So really any score can be a good score, because we see our students improve dramatically in our classes, and it doesn't really matter where they start, it matters what effort they put into it. So that's just something to think about, and something that you can really talk to your students about, because there's so much pressure in high school now, like way more than when we were in high school, and students really get anxious about this. So that's a way that you can kind of reassure them that any score is a good score, because it was just practice, and now we know what you scored, and we can work toward getting the score that you want. So one more thing that we should think about is how the PSAT compares to the SAT. So the PSAT, we said, was scored from 320 to 1520, and the SAT is scored from 400 to 1600. That's a difference of 80 points. So there's still 1200 points in the PSAT and 1200 points within the SAT ranges, but the SAT has an extra 80 points like higher. And that's because the PSAT is a little bit easier than the SAT. The idea of the PSAT is that it will tell you what you would score on the SAT if you took the SAT that same day. And it's not a perfect predictor, but it's pretty close and certainly within a margin of error, which means that if your student took the PSAT and got a 1520, the same day if they had taken the SAT, the test would have predicted that they would have gotten a 1520 on the SAT, not a 1600. There's some harder content on the SAT and just a few other things that make the SAT a bit harder than the PSAT, which is why even if your student's getting a really high score on the PSAT, it can still be a great idea to prep for the SAT so that your student can be as competitive as possible and potentially earn even more scholarship money. There's about $11 billion, with a B, billion dollars of scholarship money available for students based on merit. So I'm not even counting any financial aid or grants or anything like that, just based on merit. So like having high scores, great grades, probably writing essays and stuff like that. $11 billion out there in the US for scholarship money to go to college. So if your student's scoring high on the SAT or on the ACT, that can be another way to get some great money to pay for college. And again, like, no one wants to turn that down. No one wants to graduate from college with tons of debt. So this could be a great benefit. Okay, hopefully that answers the questions that you might have had about what the PSAT scores are and how they work. So now let's talk about how to use that information and start making plans for the future. So we already said if your student is not a junior, the next step is really to plan for prepping for the PSAT, right? So you already know what the scores are. You can think about how to do better for the PSAT for junior year to try to qualify for national merit. But if your student's a junior, and even if they're not, this is information that's going to be really helpful for you to start thinking about. But juniors for sure, your students need to think about whether they're going to take the ACT or the SAT. Now, I'm curious to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear from everybody in the chat. Like, fill up my chat. Which test do you think is the better test? The SAT or the ACT? And when I say better, like, which one do colleges care more about? Do they like the SAT better or the ACT better? What do you guys think? Or does it not matter? I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. And I see a question is like, what's considered a high score on the ACT? And it's the same concept, which is that it's going to be whatever the percentile is needed to get into the college of your choice. Cool. All right. I think I just froze. I don't know if you guys can still hear me or see me, but I am frozen. Hey guys, I'm so sorry about that. I think I'm back. My screen froze and I couldn't see anything that you guys were saying, and I couldn't see the presentation, and I couldn't move the slides. So I'm back, and I'm really sorry about that. Sometimes that happens with my internet or an internet event. Okay, so we were trying to figure out, and we thought, thanks for letting me know I'm back. Thanks so much, guys. So we were trying to figure out, is the ACT better or the SAT better? And Kaplan actually surveys admissions officers every single year. We talk to at least 300 admissions officers. Sometimes it's more like 500 from colleges across the country, different size schools, different caliber schools, like all different schools. And they tell us all this great information that we can then use and share back to you. And what we have found is that 95% of college admissions advisors are confident that the SAT and the ACT are effective tools in measuring whether a student's going to be successful at their college. Now, interestingly, 96% say they're confident about the ACT, 94% say they're confident about the SAT in our most recent surveys. That averages out to 95, and it's like within a margin of error. So I wouldn't say like schools care more about the SAT, but I love what Sucharita is telling us. Colleges don't have a preference between the SAT and the ACT. Now, this used to not be true. When I was applying to colleges, there actually was a preference. So, and it kind of mattered regionally. So this was more years ago than I care to admit, but I graduated high school in 2002. So I was applying to colleges in 2001, and I knew, like, I was applying to a bunch of Ivy League schools, and I actually went to Cornell University, which is in the Ivy League. And at that time, schools on the East Coast, which is where the Ivy League is located, just as an example, and I applied to some other East Coast schools, they tended to prefer the SAT. And schools in the Midwest, which is where I was from, I'm from the Chicago area, they tended to prefer the ACT. So I actually took the ACT and like kind of prepped more for the ACT because that's what my high school was really like more focused on. But I wanted to go to East Coast schools and they cared more about the SAT, so I took both. And I actually did better on the ACT than the SAT, not by much, but like I was better at the ACT probably because I had more exposure to it. I think it just suited my abilities a little bit more at the time. But since that time, and actually for at least the past 5 years, potentially more, but definitely in the last 5 years of our data, schools tell us that there is no preference. It doesn't matter if it's an Ivy League school. It doesn't matter what program your student's applying to, like if they're pre-med versus a journalism major. It does not matter where the school is located, how great of a school it is, how competitive it is. Schools do not care if it's the ACT or the SAT. All they care about is that your student has a great score. So this is really reassuring because then what you can do is have your student focus on which test they're going to do better on. Now you might be thinking like, well, why don't I just do both? Well, we asked colleges about that too. We asked them, is there an advantage to an applicant submitting both an ACT and an SAT score? And look, at 80% of admissions officers told us no, there's not an advantage, and 2% said they weren't sure. And there were 18% that said yes, there's an advantage. But here's the thing that I really want you guys to notice. We asked them assuming both scores are strong. Now, if you submit both scores, an ACT score and an SAT score, and they're not both strong, this could potentially even hurt you. maybe your ACT score is like baller, but the SAT score is like pretty good, but like not as good. The school might be like, well, why did they not score as well on the SAT? Is there something wrong? Like, what happened there? And they might actually start to like doubt things. Whereas if you had just submitted the ACT score as a great one, that could have been better. So that's something I want you to really be thinking about. Which one is your student going to do the best on? Now, the other thing with studying for both is that means you're dividing attention. So let's say that your student has, I'm just going to pick a number, 50 hours to study for their test. Well, if they're studying for both the ACT and the SAT, then they are going to have to split their time, and maybe they split it equally, maybe not. But imagine how that would change if they spent all 50 hours just studying for one of the tests. Like, they would do so much better in that test than if they were splitting their time. So I really want you to help your student figure out which test is going to be best for them. And so we're going to talk through the different factors of the tests. Okay. So one of the factors is the length. We're going to start with logistic factors. So the SAT is 3 hours and 15 minutes long, and the ACT is 3 hours and 5 minutes long. So just from that, I'm just curious, which test do you guys think would be better? If there was nothing else different, which test would be better, the SAT or the ACT? So if you think about it, for some students, they would say, oh, I'd rather have the more time because that means more time per question, right, on the SAT. And some students might think, oh, the ACT is going to be better because that means that I don't have to like sit as long and it's not as much of an endurance test, that even like 10 minutes can make a difference. So even just on that one simple factor, there could be two ways to go. Like, some people are going to think SAT and some people are going to think ACT. No one should decide which test they take based on the length. I just give that as an example so that you can think about how to really analyze every single factor and show you that there's really not one like clear-cut choice. It's going to vary from student to student. Okay, so let's talk about some other factors. One is the score areas. We already saw for the SAT that the areas are the composite-based score, the evidence-based reading and writing score, and the math score. And the composite score comes from half is the evidence-based reading and writing, and half is math. In ACT, there's also a composite score, and of course there's percentiles with all of this. And then you get scores for each of the 4 sections of the ACT, which are English, math, reading, and science. So one of the differences here is that for the SAT, math makes up 50% of the score. And on the ACT, math makes up 25% of the score. So for some people, they're like, oh, I want math to make up like as much of my score as possible. And some people are like, let's downplay the math, please. So that could be one difference. At the same time, sometimes the students who are amazing at math are also incredible at the science section of the ACT. So it's still another factor that you need to balance out. But that's one thing to think about. Just a fact, this shouldn't have you choose the SAT or the ACT, but just to help you understand the differences, the SAT is scored from 400 to 1600, as we saw before, with 200 to 800 for each section, and then are added together to get your total score. And on the ACT, you get a score of 1 to 36 with an 1 to 36 score for each section, and those sections are average. So the score report will tell you an English, a math, a reading, and a science score. Those 4 are averaged together to get the composite score. That's not a reason to choose one test or the other, but it is helpful to understand the scores. Okay, next is super scoring. So this is a factor that can help you kind of think about preparing. How many times should you take the test? Are you ready to take the test? We always recommend that students should start preparing for the ACT and the SAT in their junior year. We recommend that students are, and you could prepare before that, but like certainly in your junior year, you need to start. We recommend that you try to take the test in the spring semester of your junior year. Again, you could do it earlier, but you definitely want to get going in spring semester of junior year, because that way, if you don't get the score that you want or need, you have more times to take it again. But thinking about whether you should take it again and how many times you should take it, you can also factor in this concept of super scoring. Super scoring is when a school will look at your multiple scores and take your best scores from each section to give you a super score. So for example, let's say on the SAT, the first time you take it, you got a 500 in reading and writing and a 600 in math. That gives you an 1100 overall. The second time, let's say you flipped them. So you got a 600 in reading and writing and a 500 in math. It's still an 1100 overall. But on the SAT, most colleges, and it's not all, and colleges change their policy year over year, so like the only way to get the information is to contact the school, but most schools are going to super score, which means they would take your 600 from math the first test and your 600 from reading and writing on the second test and combine them to give you a 1200, which is a huge improvement over an 1100 percentile-wise on the SAT. So that could be something that's helpful because you don't necessarily have to perform as consistently, although schools might also wonder like if you're constantly fluctuating, what's going on. Now the ACT, it's less likely that schools super score. Most schools for the ACT are going to just look at how your best composite score is, and then they'll look at the 4 scores from that day. So even if like one day, let's say you scored a 32, and the score that was like pulling you down was your science score, you got a 27 in it. And then the next time you took it, you still got a 32, but this time your science score was like a 33. And so if you had super scored it, like you would have pulled it up, but most schools just don't look at that. So they will still look at trends, but they just don't normally change their overall score. So again, just something to think about. Okay, one more logistic factor, and then we'll talk about the content on the tests. Do you guys know which test has a wrong answer penalty? Is it the ACT or the SAT that has a wrong answer penalty? Curious what you guys think. And you might be like, I think this is a trick question. And the thing is, it is, because it used to be that the SAT had a wrong answer penalty, which meant that you, if you got a question wrong, you would lose points, whereas if you left it blank, nothing happened. But that's not the case anymore. So like when I took the SAT, that was the case, and that actually influenced whether you should take the SAT or the ACT because there's different strategies and like that plays to different people's skills. But now there's no wrong answer penalty on either the SAT or the ACT. There's not one on the PSAT either, which means that here's my first strategy. You can tell your students this is the #1 tip I'll give you, or like the first tip I'll give you, which is that students should answer every single question on the test. Because if they leave a question blank, they don't get any points. But if they answer it, they at least have a chance of getting it right. Even if they get it wrong, nothing happens. They just don't get any points. So they don't lose points, but they have no chance of getting points if they leave it blank. So answer every single question on the test. Don't leave any questions blank. That's the kind of test strategy that we teach our students in our classes. And I'll talk more about our strategies in a bit. I just wanted to give you a little preview. Okay, let's next talk about the content on the ACT and the SAT. So we'll start off with the sections of the test that are more similar. And the most similar section is the SAT's writing and language and the ACT's English. They're different names, but they're basically the same thing. In fact, most people, except for like our Kaplan experts who really know the tests, most people can't even tell the difference between the two sections of the test. They look the same. So this is really not a section that students choose like, oh, I'm really good at the ACT English, so I should take the ACT. Like if they're really good at ACT English, they're probably really good at SAT writing and language. And they're both worth the same amount on the test, so it doesn't make a big difference. The SAT does have a few more questions proportionally on a skill called effective language use, and the ACT has a few more questions proportionally on sentence structure, but again, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. They're basically just testing grammar rules and some other things about writing effectively and efficiently, but that is going to be really similar between the two tests. So the next section we'll talk about is the reading section. Now, this one starts to get a little bit different, and I have had students who, like, this difference made it whether they should take the SAT or the ACT. So the SAT reading is much longer in terms of the passages. The passages are significantly wordier, and that's kind of a theme on the SAT. The questions tend to be longer, more words than the ACT. But the SAT then also has more time per question, and the ACT feels more rushed and fast-paced. For some students, that's really great, and they feel like they're just like powering through and they aren't reading a bunch, they're just like getting to the questions. But for some students, that's really nerve-wracking to have that time crunch that they have on the ACT, and they like the SAT better. It just varies from student to student. Now, the other difference on SAT and ACT reading is the kinds of questions. So both tests have the same question types. And in fact, in our Kaplan classes, we teach a strategy for every single question type. So there's 4 question types written about here. So global and detail and synthesis and rhetoric. We have a global question strategy and a detail question strategy and a synthesis question strategy and a rhetoric question strategy. And there's other questions that aren't mentioned here. We have strategies for those too. What's different though is that on the SAT, there's more of those higher level questions, so the synthesis and rhetoric questions, whereas on the ACT, there's more of the lower level questions, the global and detail questions. And that's because the ACT, you don't have as much time, so you kind of have to do some more lower level questions. The SAT, you have more time, so harder questions. So another difference. Now, as long as we're doing kind of like the verbal related sections, let's talk about the essay. So we'll talk about math and science in a minute, but let's just briefly touch on the essay. The essay is optional on both the SAT and the ACT. Now, about 13% of colleges require the essay. There is no essay on the PSAT, so there's no like practice version of this in like an official test. It's just on the SAT and the ACT. 13% of colleges require it. Some additional colleges recommend it. If a college recommends something, you should definitely do it, by the way. But most colleges, like the vast majority of colleges, say like it's not needed or it's optional. Some colleges like won't even really look at it even if you do send it. But the thing is, if you don't know where you're applying yet, when you take the test, you should definitely take the essay, because the only way to take the essay is if you take the whole rest of the test. And it would really stink, let's say that you like took the ACT or the SAT like in March or April, and you got a great score because you had studied, but you didn't take the essay, and then by the time you get to like March or April junior, by the time you get to senior year, you're like, oh, I want to apply to like XYZ school, and it recommends the essay. Oh, now you gotta study for the ACT or the SAT again, and it's been like, could have been like 6 or 8 or months, and you might need to really study a lot again, and like that's not really the best plan. So if you're not sure, we do recommend taking the essay. The essay does not contribute to your overall score. It's scored completely separately. This is true on both the SAT and the ACT, so like it does not influence your score out of 1600 on the SAT or out of 36 on the ACT. And you can see this, the differences between the essays. This is not really a reason to choose the SAT versus the ACT. You just want to know what's on the tests for whichever one you're going to take. So it's a little bit longer on the SAT. That's kind of a theme. And then there's a longer thing you have to read and analyze, but you've got to be objective on the SAT. Whereas on the ACT, you don't have to read as much. You also have less time. And then you have to produce your own response and come up with your own argument. So a little bit different. But we have methods for our students, and we also actually have an essay grading team, so our students can submit their essays to be graded and get feedback so that they can get the scores that they want to be competitive when they send these in. All right, so now let's talk about the big differences content-wise between the ACT and the SAT. And the first one is math. On the SAT, there are 2 math sections, and this is also true of the PSAT. The PSAT mimics the math pretty closely here, just with some slightly easier questions, which accounts for that score difference. On the SAT, there's a non-calculator math section and a calculator math section. But on the ACT, students can use their calculator throughout the entire math test. So some students get really nervous when they cannot use their calculator. And some students find that like the non-calculator section is awesome. So that's one thing that they can really think about. Another is that on the SAT, there's multiple choice and there's what's called grid-in answers. These are answers that students have to come up with their own response, and there's a little grid that they have to fill it in. There's no multiple choice. This is true on the PSAT as well. The ACT only has multiple choice, which makes it easier to guess if you're like running out of time or you don't know how to do a question or you're just nervous or whatever. So that can make it a little bit like less anxiety provoking, I think, on the ACT. So some people like that. There is a difference that ACT then has 5 multiple choice answers, kind of to compensate for the fact that it's easier to guess on multiple choice than on a grid-in. And then, as I'm sure you're catching on to the theme, the SAT's math questions are wordier than the ACT's. The ACT's questions tend to be a little bit more straightforward in terms of the fact that they get to the point of the question. But the ACT tests more heavily on geometry and trigonometry compared to the SAT. Both tests test arithmetic, algebra. There's like some probability and statistics that come from like algebra 2. They both test geometry. They both test trig. but the ACT tests geometry and trig more than the SAT. So math is definitely a reason that students choose one test or the other. This should heavily play into their choice. Now, the final section of the ACT is science. This is a huge difference between the SAT and the ACT because the SAT does not even have a science section of the test. There is an SAT sub-score for science, and colleges will look at that. But on the ACT, the science section plays 25% into the composite score. Here's the thing about science, because a lot of times I've had students that are like, oh, I'm pre-med, so like I definitely need to take the ACT because I'm like applying for pre-med, so I need to like have science. And then some students are like, oh, I'm like terrible at science, I definitely should take the SAT. Nope, neither of those things are right. It does not matter. It doesn't matter what program you're applying to. It doesn't matter if you think you're good or bad at science, because it's not science content that's being tested, it's scientific thinking that's being tested. The colleges want to know if you're going to be a critical thinker, if your student is going to be a critical thinker. That's the kind of person that they want to be teaching in their college courses. So they're going to test in the science section of the ACT, they're testing for things like pattern analysis and data representation on charts and graphs, and whether a student can figure out what the conclusion is or the result is of an experiment without being told flat out what it is, or understanding like if something was changed, what that would do. These kinds of questions are kind of interspersed throughout the SAT, and they're all in one place on the ACT. So it's tested in both places, but if someone's really great at this kind of thinking, they'll shine even more on the ACT. And I've had students who, you know, they are like poli-sci, they want to become poli-sci majors. They're really critical thinkers or lawyers. And then I've also had students who are very science heavy. Normally, like they're like amazing at biology and physics, and they're actually like not as good at the ACT science. So don't let it be based on whether like you like science or you're good at science. It should be based on whether you are good at the kind of questions that are on the ACT science section, and if that should play a quarter of your score or not. So those are the differences. And so based on what you know now, what do you guys think? Would your student be best equipped to take the ACT or the SAT? And I'd love to hear from everybody in the chat which one you think would be the best for your student. And while you're telling me that, I want to give you another great way to figure out which test is going to be best for your student. We offer at Kaplan free practice tests for the ACT and the SAT. In fact, we also offer a combo test where those students can take both tests on the same day. We even have some coming up as early as this weekend. So we would strongly encourage you to have your students sign up for these free practice tests. It is the same test every time, so they don't need to keep signing up over and over. They should sign up though and gauge their abilities, because then they can start to assess whether they are better at one test or the other. They'll get more exposure to the test. They can weigh all these factors in. And then it's not just which score they got a higher score on, you know, percentile score. We learned about percentiles earlier, but it's about which one they feel they have more potential on. So maybe someone, for example, didn't score very well on the ACT science, but then they see how it works. Once they learn how it works and they like are exposed to the strategy, they feel like they could have great improvements. Then that actually might be a better one to focus on. So you really want to think about potential for improving. Okay, so I see Alexander saying, like, you've actually never even heard of the ACT. Well, now you know, Alexander, so I'm so glad that now you know, because the ACT maybe is going to be better for your daughter. Yeah, Brenda's saying, like, maybe math would be better, but shorter passages. I agree. Like, there's so many different factors that you want to be thinking about. So that's also why taking a practice ACT and practice SAT is going to really help. And the PSAT kind of starts to guide you there. There's more information in the score report that can help you, but I would really recommend taking a free practice test. It's free, so there's no reason to not take it, so that your students can really figure out what's going to be best for them. Okay, so we've talked a lot about choosing the test. Once you choose which test to prep for, then you got to make your prep plan. Whatever you're going to do when you're prepping, your whole goal is to get a higher score so you can be as competitive as possible. You want to let your students unleash their potential so that they can show colleges that they deserve and belong at that college of their choice. So let's talk about how to do that. Well, anytime that you're prepping for a test, you want to make sure that you have score-raising strategies for every section of the test. You don't want just an overall strategy, though those are good too, like the one I said about making sure that you answer every single question, but you also want to have an overall strategy for math and English and writing and reading and science. Every single section of the test you want to have a strategy for. And you want to know that they're going to rate your score. At Kaplan, we actually guarantee that our students' scores are going to go up using our score-raising strategies. So that's one thing to definitely keep in mind. Now, you also want to have strategies not just for the content of the sections and the way you approach the sections, but also in terms of time management and pacing. So many students run out of time on one of the sections, and a lot of students finish really early. I've had students finish like 20 minutes early sometimes, and they're not scoring very high. And then like, what were you doing those final 20 minutes? You should have been using that time. So it can go in either direction. We want to make sure our students are using their time really wisely and getting as many points as possible. So here's another strategy, which is that every single question within a section is worth the same amount of points. It's not like they're like, oh, number 7 is the hardest question, so that one's going to be worth more than number 27, which is an easy question. Nope. Every single question is worth the same amount of points. So that tells us that if your student is running out of time and they're like, let's say there's 35 questions on a section. Well, if they get 1 through 30, they complete, and they just don't even do the final 5 questions because they ran out of time. Maybe they guess. But maybe like questions 31 and 32 and 33 were like their best content area, but they didn't get to them. Well, we at Kaplan teach these great triaging strategies to help students to focus on getting the best points for them first. And it's going to differ from student to student. Even like Brenda's twins, maybe, they got different scores. So maybe one needs to have one triaging strategy and the other needs to have another triaging strategy. And that's one of the other things you want to look for, is whether the prep program you're choosing is going to customize to your own student's individual needs, and that the strategies are going to work specifically for your student. So that's one thing I really want you to look for when you're choosing a prep option. Finally, you want to make sure that your student has focused practice. We'll talk about the practice part first. So when your student is practicing, they should be practicing on realistic test-like questions. Sure, they have like their geometry textbook or something, but studying geometry with a textbook and like working on proofs, that's not really going to help on the ACT or the SAT, because that's not how geometry is tested on the ACT or SAT. You want to have your students study using test-like questions, realistic questions that are going to expose them to the ways that the content is actually tested. At Kaplan, we offer 8 full-length tests as part of our classes. We have tons of other questions in realistic practice with a customizable QBank that students can make their own quizzes on. We have tons of questions in the books that students will be using as well. So that's a lot of practice that students are able to access as part of their study program. But the other part I want to talk about is focused practice. This means making sure that you're studying the right things. So with every single practice test, including those free tests, actually I mentioned the free SAT and free ACT practice tests, we give our students a full score report. It tells them every single question, like whether they got it right or wrong, what the correct answer is, the explanation to it, so they can review that. But then we also include what's called a performance summary. And that is going to tell our students what areas they did really well on and which areas they can work on to improve more. And we break it down in content. So for example, let's say in math, maybe your student didn't really do very well on functions or irrational numbers. Both of those areas were not so great. Well, functions is worth a lot more points on the test because there's way more questions on functions, whereas irrational numbers are only like 1 or 2 questions at the most. So what we would tell them is, you know what, functions, if you're not doing well on, we really got to work there. That's like a really high yield area on the test. We know which areas are the most important. We tell our students, we have a breakdown of points for them. And then we'd also be like, you know what, here's a functions workshop to go to. Here's a functions quiz. Here are 20 questions in the QBank to work on from functions. Here is a chapter in your book to read about functions. Here is a channel lesson, I'll talk about that in a second, to watch about functions. We give them all this focused practice so that they're working on that, whereas maybe they're already like crushing it on order of operations. Well, then like we don't want them to spend any time working on that if they're already getting all those questions right. We want them to study smarter, not harder. It's not just about putting a bunch of time in, it's about putting the time into the areas that they need. That's what we do at Kaplan. So I just mentioned the channel. The channel is one of my favorite Kaplan resources, and it's because it's one of my students' favorite resources. And like, I mean, I gotta be honest, ACT and SAT students, they're high schoolers, most of them are not like, oh my God, Beth, thank you so much for assigning homework to me. Like, I wish that they were like that. But they're really not that excited about doing their homework, as I'm sure as parents you can relate to. You're not frequently like begging your student to not do homework. So when we have a resource that students love, like the channel, it's so great because it means that they're gonna want to use it more. So the channel is essentially like Netflix for the ACT or the SAT. We let students rate the programming just like on Netflix, so then we know like, is this episode a good episode? Is this teacher a great teacher? And we only keep the stuff that's awesome that our students love. It's for students, rated by students, with our best teachers in the entire company. Arthur, who you've been seeing in the chat, is one of the teachers. You can see him actually in this lower left-hand corner here. That's Arthur. He's one of the teachers on the channel. And we have over 30 hours of programming on the channel. And it's all customizable. So if a student is like really, really awesome at math and just needs like help with scatter plots or trig, we have sessions on that. Whereas maybe somebody who's struggling more with math, we have like more basic operations of math. Or, you know, we have it for every single content area of the test, including the essay. We have everything. Overall study planning, anything that your student can need, and over 30 hours of programming. And the best part is that in addition to it being like Netflix, they can also go live. So if they want to go live and interact with us and interact with their teachers and ask questions, they can do that too. It's a really awesome program, and it's only available at Kaplan, only available to our students enrolled in our classes. So let me tell you a little bit about our classes. So first we'll talk about PSAT prep, because again, for those of you who have kids that are either sophomores or freshmen or younger, you're going to want to be thinking about PSAT prep first. You want your student to prep for the PSAT for their October of junior year so they can get that highest score possible, potentially score for national merit, qualify for national merit, and then also like by prepping for the PSAT, they're going to have that much more of a great foundation for the ACT and the SAT. So we have a bunch of different options for prep. We've got our courses, which are in person or live online. That's our prep option. It starts at $4.99. We also have self-paced if we've got a student who wants to work more on their own. But I really want to focus on this one in the bottom left-hand corner, this unlimited prep. This would be my #1 recommendation for parents of sophomores or freshmen. If you're a parent of a junior, hold tight. I'm going to have a separate recommendation for you. But if you are a parent of a sophomore or a freshman, unlimited prep is the one I would most recommend for you. And here is why. Unlimited prep is going to give you access to our PSAT course, our ACT course, and our SAT course, all of them, as many times as your student wants to take it, starting the day you enroll, so like today, all the way through December of their senior year, which is the last time that they can take the ACT and the SAT. So let's say that your student's a sophomore and they you sign them up right now and you get them started on ACT or SAT prep. They can be taking this essentially for 2 years for one price of $15.99. It's amazing because they can take the class over and over as many times as they want. They could be engaged a lot sometimes. They could be less engaged other times, like if they've got a lot of sports going on or you know, whatever clubs they're doing, like, or APs or something if they need to kind of fluctuate throughout the year. And then if we ever make changes to our courses, because we're always updating and revising them based on the test and data that we collect, they would get all that new stuff. They could take the classes in person or live online or mix them up. So this is my #1 recommendation for our parents of sophomores or freshmen. Man, if you've got a child who's a freshman, you can get this today and they would have access for 3 years for one price. So it's amazing. It gives them everything that they could possibly want for their prep. That's the unlimited prep option for $15.99. Now, if your student is a junior, you don't need PSAT prep anymore. You want to start focusing on ACT and SAT prep. For ACT and SAT prep for juniors, because they're already halfway through junior year and have already passed the PSAT, unlimited prep might be good for some of them, especially if you know they definitely want to take the SAT and the ACT. But as we talked about before, that's not always needed. So what I would recommend most for our juniors out there is a prep class for the ACT or the SAT, and they should choose one. And then focus on that, and they can choose it by taking a free practice test this month, and then choose which program to sign up for in the beginning of the year. That way they can get started on their prep. We recommend prepping for at least 3 months prior to the ACT or the SAT, and because we recommend taking the test usually in March, April, or May, that means they should be starting to prep in January, February, or March. So really make sure that your students are getting ready there. Now, it starts at $8.99. We do have lots of different options with our prep courses. We've got live online, kind of like what we're doing now, but our live online classrooms have even more interactive options for our students. They always have an on-camera teacher as well as at least one off-camera teacher, so our students can talk to their teachers and ask questions and get lots of one-on-one attention even as the class is occurring. Kind of like what's happening right now when you guys ask a question, like someone's always answering you right away. And then we have polls and other ways for students to interact in our classes, and our live online students actually rate our classes at the highest possible. So we are really pleased with that. Now, because you are here today, I actually have a gift for you, because we are so glad that you're taking these steps to really ensure that your children are having great success in their college admissions. So instead of this price being $8.99, we have a special discount code for you. So if you want to take live online, we'll actually give you $250 off of live online with the code PREP250. And I'll just move this to up here. And then if you want to take in person, since this is a live online event, we have a better code for live online. But if you want to take an in-person class, it will give you $200 off of in-person. So instead of it being $8.99 for live online, it would be $6.49 for live online, and it would be $6.99 for in-person. And these codes are good for 7 days, and you can use them either online, or if you call into 1-800-CAP-TEST to enroll, that is another option for you. So that's the way to plan for make your test prep plan. But there were still 2 more steps. One was to take the ACT or the SAT. And again, we're not going to actually take the test, but we do want to let you know that if your student takes the test and doesn't do as well as they had hoped, we actually have a guarantee for you. So we guarantee that your student is going to score higher on the test, or we will actually give you your money back. Of course, you don't really want your money back. You want your student to score higher. So we actually have another part of the guarantee, which is that if your student does score higher, but they still think that they could score even higher, they're just not satisfied with how much they've improved, we will actually let them take the course again for free. Okay, and so this is called the higher score guarantee. I really, really love this this aspect of our course. So for example, I had a student that took the SAT with me in March of this year. So this is a while ago. She had already taken the test previously before Kaplan, and she had gotten like an 80th percentile score. Well, then with Kaplan, with my class, she had actually raised her score to the 94th percentile. It's a great improvement, but she wants to go to Dartmouth, and Dartmouth is really competitive, and 94th percentile, like even 99th percentile, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get in. And she felt like even with 94th percentile, she could have done better. So she had prepped it for March. She prepped again using the higher score guarantee, so she was able to take the class again for free, and she raised her score even more. So hopefully she'll get into Dartmouth. We don't know yet. Applications are just they're due this month. So yeah, hopefully she'll get in. But she was able to use that great higher score guarantee option. Now, in addition to taking the official test, the other part of the 5-step method was to apply to college. And so we also have a great stat that I wanted to share with you. which is that 9 out of 10 Kaplan students get into one or more of their top choice colleges. And you might notice there's an asterisk there with like a bunch of fine print. And usually when there's fine print in like a claim like this, you're like, that sounds shady. I would love for you to read the fine print because it is something that makes us so proud. It tells you that this has been true for the past 5 years. May 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. We don't yet have the data from 2017. We still are compiling that. It takes some time to find out everyone where they went to school, but we've been trending this way, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is true again, that 9 out of 10 Kaplan students got into one or more of their top choice colleges. So when you choose to invest with Kaplan for your students' prep, you can be really confident that they're going to get a higher score. You are putting them on the path to getting into the college of their choice. You're going to make them so much more confident and let them really unleash their potential so that they can wow colleges with their ACT and SAT scores and make them much more competitive applicants to college. So thank you so much again for taking the time to learn about this today. It's so great that you're such engaged parents and doing everything you can for your children. And actually, I just learned we actually have an even better special surprise for you. So I'm going to go back to this really quickly. Here we go. So we actually can offer you today, this is only good through Monday, so it's not good for a week. So these 2 codes I gave you are good for 7 days, but through Monday only, and I'll put this on the screen, through Monday only, if you use the code SUCCESS250, that's going to give you $250 off. It's going to give you $250 off of in-person, live online, and then some of our other in-person and live online prep options, the one that's highlighted. We don't have a code for unlimited prep right now because that's already a discount, right? If you think about like adding your $4.99 PSAT class, your $8.99 ACT class, your $8.99 SAT class, you're already way above $15.99. It's a huge discount. And then we also let you do it for years. So the unlimited prep, again, that's my #1 recommendation for our sophomores or younger. And then for juniors, I would recommend live online prep. That is what you're going to want to do. Well, that is the end of our content. However, if you have any other questions that we haven't answered for you yet, please let us know, and we would love to help you out. I also see Missy put in the chat a great link, which is that you can schedule time to talk directly one-on-one with a teacher. It's a great way to help figure out like what's the best thing for you. We are big believers in customizing your prep to your students' needs. So even, I know I keep using Brenda as an example because she has twins, but even twins might have different learning styles and needs, and like maybe one would do better with live online than in person, or maybe one would be better with ACT and one's better with SAT. These are all the kinds of things that we really want to focus on so that you can have your child really harness their strengths and succeed. So again, thank you all so much for investing this time and effort in your kids so that they can be successful. And we really appreciate you being here tonight. We hope to see you or your students in another Kaplan classroom soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a really good night. And again, we'll stick around if you still have more questions. Thanks, everyone.